The second phase of this project is to create a new InDesign document from scratch. Let's get started by, first of all, opening InDesign and going to the preferences for your InDesign and then opening units and increments. Make sure your horizontal and vertical scales are set to inches. Once this is done, we'll say OK. Now we can create a new file, and you'll notice by default inches is now the unit of measure. We want the width and the height of this document to be 12 inches. We do want facing pages to be turned on. Since this is a 2-page calendar, we need to have 12 months times 2, which is 24, plus a front and a back cover, so that's 26 pages. So set your pages to be 26. For now, we're not going to divide it up into columns, and we're not going to worry about the margins. So you can keep columns at 1 and default of ½ an inch or so for the margins. We'll change this up later. Do be sure to set your bleed settings to 0.125 for all the sides. Everything else will be exactly the same. We'll say create and open up our new document. You'll notice in the Pages panel, we've got one parent page and a single page or a single spread for each of the different months that we'll be working with. Now, since each of our different month pages are going to have the same layout, we want to start by creating a parent page that can be used as a template. If you scroll over to the top of your Pages panel, you may need to click and drag down this bar to see it, but let's double click the parent page A up here at the top so that we can see this spread. Now our calendar is going to be laid out with the image over here on the left and all of our calendar data and each of the dates over here on the right. Since this calendar is also going to be hanging on a wall, it's going to be rotated 90 degrees clockwise. And it's going to be a little bit difficult if I try to lay out everything like this when I have to turn everything 90 degrees. So let's rotate our spread so that we can see this a little bit more natural. If you go over to your Pages panel again, you can open up the options for the panel. Down towards the bottom, go down to the Page Attributes, choose Rotate Spread, and let's choose 90 degrees clockwise. Now we can see our page up and down. Just keep in mind, later on when we start to change things around, this side is the top, this is the bottom, and the inside and outside are rotated again as well. Now we're going to be creating just a dummy blank mock-up for all of the pages, and this will be the template that we're going to later change up. So don't worry about how everything looks right now. Later on, we'll individualize this for each month. Since this top page is going to have our picture, let's go ahead and add a photo of any one of our nebula to this side. I'm going to choose my rectangle frame, and I'm going to make my rectangle frame go from the bleed edge all the way down, just for this top portion, from here down to right here. Everything looks good. Let's drop in one of our pictures. You can choose any picture that you want. And if necessary, if you need to scale it down, you can always go up to your control panel and choose Fit Proportionally so it will fit it nicely to your entire frame. Notice that when we do this, because we're working in a parent page, this image is going to start to appear on all of your other left-sided pages. That's okay. Again, later on, we're going to go back and we're going to fix this and correct it for each of your different designs. For now, let's just focus on the parent page design. Now let's scroll down and focus on putting the text and all the calendar data down here. There's going to be 3 parts to your calendar. It needs a title for the month, which will be nice and big. It needs to have an area that has each individual date, and also it needs to have an area for the metadata that we can put about your image on here somewhere too. In order to control where everything goes, we're going to adjust our margins accordingly. Now there's lots of different ways you can set up a calendar, and we're going to go over a lot of these in class, and I'll provide an extra document to give you some insights and some things to think about. But for now, let's go ahead and just put in a title for a dummy month. I'm going to grab my type tool, click and drag and create a large text box. Let's type out January. By default, you can see the size of it. Naturally, it needs to be much, much larger, so I'm going to make it bigger. The size of it, I don't know. It really depends also on the font that I choose. You can choose any font that you deem appropriate, but I was playing around with several of these and I thought this one was kind of a cool one to work through because it has kind of a space type look. Now with this placed on here, I've got a lot of different options of where it can go. Don't think that it has to be up in the top center. You can have it over to the side, either side. You can have it down at the bottom. You can rotate it sideways and put it on either side. You could even add it on top of your image and get it to work well with whatever picture that you have. But for now, just for the sake of demo, I'm going to place it right here up at the very top. I'm going to make it a little bit larger. We'll stick it, say, right there. The next thing we need to do is to pull off some of our metadata so that we get an idea of how large we want that text box to be. In order to do this, we need to set it up first. Image metadata is pulled from the captions. The first thing we need to do is to go to Object, down to Captions, and let's set up our captions. Right now, you can see that we can put text in before and after and the metadata we want to pull from it. We want our text box to contain the document's title, so open up that and look for the title metadata thing. You may have to scroll up or down in order to be able to find it. Oh, there it is. Aha, there's title. And then after that, we want to click the plus sign and we want to add the description. And there's our description. Next, we're going to put this below the image, and the offset really won't matter because we're going to change it over later. Later on, we may also apply a paragraph style if you wish, but for now, I'll keep it at no paragraph style and say OK. Now I can select the image, return to Object, Captions, and let's generate a static caption. You can see when it does that, it places a little text box down here at the very bottom. And so this is the metadata text that we want to pull from the picture. Now I can resize this and get an idea of roughly the width or the height and how much data I'm going to be working with. In my case, I want to have this off to the side right here. Later on, I can always go back and I can change the width and the height and the placement. But for now, this gives me a good working idea of how much space my entire calendar can have inside of this area. Since I've got it in here now, I'm going to go ahead and select this text and let's put it in a font that I like as well. So I'm going to choose maybe Avenir and we'll set this to be a bold, nice and large. We'll even do uppercase for all of that. I think that fits well for there. All right. The next phase is we want to add a grid to the area that's below this. And we're going to leverage our margins in order to make everything fit nicely. You can see by now the default margins are set at 1/2 inch. I want to pull these margins in so that it's inside of just this area. Since I only want to change the margins on this page, go to your Pages panel and make sure this right page is selected. With only this page selected, let's go up to Layout, down to Margins and Columns, and here's where I can adjust my margins and columns for all the sides. Just remember, this margin is the inside margin. You can see if once it's unlinked, so we don't want to have these linked together, let's increase this number, and as I increase it, you can see that margin is increasing as well. By the way, I have preview turned on and I'm not adjusting my layout. So increasing that side will give me a little bit more space. This is the bottom margin, so let's push it over here and increase it until I can see that amount too. Now, this is the margins I've set up for my document. Yours may be slightly different based on your needs, but this is how we can set up this particular area so that we can have all of our dates inside of just that one. Play around with the configuration. I guarantee you can do a lot with this. We'll say OK to this. Now that we've got our margins set up inside of here, let's establish a grid inside of it. To create a grid of guidelines, let's go back up to Layout and choose Create Guides. With Create Guides turned on, we can create a number of rows and columns. Make sure a preview is turned on so you can see it. Since we want to have a row for each of our days of the week, we need to set our row number to be 7. You can see it divides it up. And we're going to set our gutter to be 0 because we just want a single line. The other thing to note is make sure your guides are optimized for the margins of it. So you can see that it's dividing it just inside of our margin area and doesn't go all the way to the page. Now the number of columns needs to have enough to multiply up to at least 30. So we're working in multiples of 7. So let's do 5 columns with a gutter of 0 as well. This should give us 35, which is more than enough that we need for our design. With this done, we'll say OK. Now you can see we've got a grid matrix that we can put our dates inside of. Now at any time, if you want to change this grid, it's totally doable. You can always go up to Layout, down to Margins and Columns. This time, if I adjust my margins and tell it to adjust the layout, check out what happens. I can increase my inside spacing, and as I do that, it's going to also adjust the columns inside of it. Let's give myself a little bit more room down here at the bottom. This is the outside edge of my page. So if I increase this number, I'll zoom out so we can see it, you can see that my guides are also being adjusted inside of here as well. This really is helpful for being able to dial in exactly what you want before you commit to a final design. Now that I've got my grid established, I'm going to go up to View, down to Guides, and I'm going to lock my guides into place. This way I don't accidentally select them and move them around. Now let's go and design the grid for all of our numbers. I'm going to zoom into our first little cell, and we're going to make just a dummy cell to make it look good before we copy everything over. Grab your Type tool and let's create a text box that's just inside of this area. So we're using this grid to mark off the height and the width of it. I'm going to type in a 2-digit number like 99. That way I know everything fits well. I can highlight it. Let's go ahead and do our formatting. So I'm going to set it to be Avenir. Let's do black. I'm going to make it larger so that it's nice and visible. Now I don't want my number to be right along this edge. I want to give it some inset so that it gives it some breathing space. So with my selection tool selected, I can go up to Object, Text Frame Options. To give it a little bit of breathing space, remember this is the bottom edge, or excuse me, actually this is rotated, so we can create this normally. So when we're on the left side, I'm going to increase it to give it some more space here, and we'll do the same for the top edge, and we'll bring it down. Now that it's got some padding, I know that it will fit well inside of this area. We'll say OK to that. All right, the last thing I'm going to do is to convert this number over to just a couple of X's. Again, this is dummy text. I'm going to go back and change this later on. Now we can duplicate this into the rest of our grid. Here's the magic trick. Before we do any duplication, pay attention to the width and the height of the text box that you just created. I've got it selected, so these numbers here are going to be very important to copy over. Your numbers may be different, but this is where you can find the information in your control panel. Or you can go to your properties panel, and you can also find it in the transform panel with this one. With it selected, let's go up to Edit, down to Step and Repeat. In this case, you can turn on Preview, and also make sure Create Grid is turned on. With Create Grid selected, I can repeat this across rows and columns. Additionally, we want to make sure the vertical and horizontal offset are set up on this. So in our case, we want the vertical offset to be the height of it. So whatever this number is, 1.6875 in my case, 1.6875, and the horizontal offset is going to be the width of this. So the width is 0.12411, 12411. Now, as I go to increase the number of rows and columns, it will duplicate it and place it perfectly where it needs to be. So we need 7 columns and we need 5 rows. That'll give us our entire grid. If these numbers are off by a little bit, it'll compound and be skewed. So make sure that number for your height and the width is the same for the vertical and the horizontal. Now when I back up, you can see I've perfectly got my entire grid. Now let's add our days of the week up at the very top. To make the days of the week for your design, let's grab the Type tool. I'm going to click and drag all the way across our entire grid from one side to the other, but I'm still holding down my mouse. This time, use your right arrow key and press it to divide it up into different text boxes. So there's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. You can see now that I've got a text box inside of each area. Hold down the Option key, and this is important, when you let go of your mouse, and that'll divide it up into individual single areas. Otherwise, if you didn't hold down the Option key, it's going to link all of those together. With this done, I can go in now and I can type in each of the days of the week. I can also highlight it if I need to and change the formatting. With all of these done, I'm going to select all of them. Let's do some formatting. So I'll grab my Type tool. Once again, I'll set it to be the font that I would like for it to be. Whoops, deselected it. There we go. I'm going to make these nice and bold. Maybe for this, I'll even center them up. So there they are centered here. If we want them centered inside of their frames, this is where we can go to Object, Text Frame Options, and we can do a vertical justification to be in the center as well. Now they're inside of their individual frames. I'm going to make mine all caps, and let's do the backgrounds black with the type be white. Again, you can style this however you want. This is just for mine. I do have a little bit of a problem though. You can see, though I've got 7 created on here, this last one is aligned to the right side, and this first one is aligned to the left side. They're not centered inside of each area. Let's fix that. I'm going to choose Sunday, and using my arrow keys, I'm going to nudge it over until I see it's visually centered inside of this side. Let's do the same for Saturday. Select it, and then visually just nudge it over a little bit till both sides are aligned. Now to align all of the others, I'm going to select all of my days, and I can open up my alignment and distribution panel. So let's go to Window, down to Object and Layout. Here's my align. And this is where we can distribute all of these evenly horizontally. With that clicked, whoops, I'm going to undo. I made one mistake. Do make sure you're distributing them not to the page, but to the selection. That's the trick. Now when I distribute them, they'll be nice and centered all throughout. The final thing I want to add to this are some grid lines to divide up my design. Again, depending on how you want to design this, you can do this a couple of different ways. By simply, the first thing you could do is select all of your picture boxes or your text boxes that you've got your grid. Hey, if I change the background to be a color and then made it a tint, that's one quick and easy way. Oops, made it a little bit too light. Let's lighten up that tint. I can make it show up this way. The other thing is, if I wanted to draw lines, I'm going to set this back to none. Let's use our grid. I'm going to use my line tool, and I'm going to go through and carefully draw a line down each of my guides. With it done, I'm going to set the thickness of it. First, we'll make it black so I can see it. That looks pretty good. And again, we can hold down the Option key and click and drag to duplicate it. From here, you can repeat this process and getting it to snap right on top of each one. There it is set to there. Let's grab our line tool again and let's draw some line segments for each one here. You can either duplicate it or if it's faster, just redraw for each guide. There it is set to there. I'm going to go back into preview mode. Forgot to give this a little bit of thickness, so let's go ahead and select these lines as well. Now we can add black, and I can see those individual grids. If you wanted, you could also put a box around the entire design, but I'm not going to do it for mine. I'm going to set my design to be this. Again, play around with the layout and placement of everything that's on here. Everything is fully customizable, from the colors you choose, to the placement of everything, to the fonts that you choose. All of this is the style that you want it to be. When you look at your Pages panel, notice now, since we've been working in the parent page, if I double click, all of my other pages have this nice and populated on here. In the next phase, it's simply a matter of replacing each of our images and our text for each individual month that's necessary.